You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
So you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge, that you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good.
Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth involved in a tense exchange there with Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. The questioning coming during Hegseth's confirmation hearing in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Committee Democrats focusing on allegations of a history of alcohol abuse, marital infidelity, a sexual assault investigation, and financial mismanagement at 2 nonprofits Hegseth led. Hegseth denied the allegations, saying they were based on anonymous sources in the liberal media. Republicans praised Hegseth for his service in Army combat and promised to reform the military that they say has become too focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Join me to discuss the hearing and much more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Hey, Brett, Democrats did not pick the order of their question askers in order of who's going to be the most effective. It seems like it was probably done based on seniority. A lot of people just reading questions off a piece of paper that I guess their staffers wrote for them. But when it got to Tim Kaine, he was really tough in his questioning. Do you think Kaine and any other Democrats have been able to draw blood on a nominee that seems headed for confirmation?
Yeah, I think Tim Kaine's line of questioning that we saw there was particularly notable because he really went directly at the matter. He wasn't dancing around these questions of sexual misconduct or Hegseth's personal life and his infidelity or his multiple marriages or anything like that. He was really essentially going right at Hegseth over that. As far as the question of whether it'll make a difference in the end, it doesn't seem like Republicans are inclined to be persuaded over what they already know about Hegseth's personal life at this point. One point of contention is that Republicans have said that one of Hegseth's accusers of sexual misconduct has not publicly come forward to speak about it, and that if that doesn't happen, they're inclined to kind of maybe not take that allegation as not necessarily as seriously, but that maybe it would not carry as much weight as if somebody came forward publicly.
She apparently signed an NDA, which would prevent her from coming forward, but we won't go there. One might argue that the most important person watching this is President-elect Trump, because his support is so crucial to Hegseth continuing to be the nominee and eventually being confirmed. How do you think Trump is sitting back viewing Hegseth's performance?
Yeah, from what I've heard and seen so far, I think the president-elect and his team are pretty pleased with what they've seen. We know that President-elect Trump really likes someone who will fight for themselves, who will fight for Trump and his agenda. Trump and his aides have been circulating clips. They've been highlighting exchanges that Hegseth has had pushing back on these reports, slamming them as part of a liberal smear campaign, as anonymous sources that don't know what they're talking about. That's sort of right from the Trump playbook, kind of slamming these things as smear campaigns, as fake news, et cetera. And more broadly, Hegseth's vows to, de-woke the military as it is, or to sort of put the focus on the country's fighting force and its lethality. That is, of course, in line with what Trump has talked about doing on the campaign trail as well.
Joni Ernst, Republican senator from Iowa, is seen as a crucial voice in all of this. She's a combat veteran, victim of sexual assault herself. She had previously expressed some reservations about Hegseth early on in the nomination process, but during this hearing, notable that she didn't really challenge him on any of the accusations, pretty much just praised him for what she thought he would do good for the department. Do you think that's a sign that barring any major change, new accusations coming out, that there's just not going to be enough Republican no votes to derail his nomination?
Yeah, the Joni Ernst vote, I think, was really crucial because she was seen as one vote where if she voted no, it could be sort of a tipping point for Pete Hegseth here, especially, if she votes no, then you only need a couple other Republicans to vote no. That majority's at 52 right now because they're waiting to replace J.D. Vance in Ohio. But math aside, I think Joni Ernst, to your point, she was not not necessarily holding Hegseth's feet to the fire. She got some answers about his past comments on women serving in combat roles and assurances there that I think will soothe some of her concerns. And I think this is sort of a result of what we saw was essentially a real sort of pressure campaign from Trump allies, from Hegseth and his team, to sort of put the spotlight on Ernst and essentially have sort of the MAGA movement turn their ire toward her when it seemed like maybe she was skeptical of this nomination.
There was another exchange with Senator Kaine that caught my attention. He was asking whether Hegseth ever physically abused any of his former spouses, whether they had signed any NDAs. Hegseth vehemently denied any of that. But do you have any idea what Kaine was getting at there? Are these just wild questions meant to be inflammatory and damage Hegseth? Or is there any notion on Capitol Hill that maybe there could be more accusations coming out? And, Democrats have said that they don't believe that the FBI background check that's been conducted so far is thorough enough.
Yeah, we heard Tim Kaine when he was doing this questioning saying that, senators had access to accounts of some of these allegations against Hegseth, but he wouldn't exactly say who. He said, that Hegseth's own mother was one example. That may have just been referring to a New York Times story about Hegseth's mother's past criticisms of her son and his treatment of women. But I think Senator Kaine's sort of line of questioning there does get at this idea that maybe Democrats have heard more or seen more, but that because of NDAs, because of a lack of a thorough background check, as they've spoken about, that maybe they are unable to speak more publicly about it, more thoroughly about it, but he wanted to raise it in this sort of high-profile confirmation hearing, because otherwise I think to just be sort of throwing these allegations out there would certainly be unlike senators, but also sort of potentially backfiring on Democrats who are trying to raise these allegations.
Is there any notion that the FBI would go back and look further into his history, provide more interview accounts or any additional information that would come to light?
It's certainly possible. I mean, we saw with the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing in the Supreme Court that the FBI, that there was sort of a further investigation into some of the allegations against
at the
Brett
request
Kavanaugh.
of senators at that point.
Right. So certainly it would require, I think, senators to really push for it, and what that might require is sort of an indication, maybe some Republicans, that they wanted to see more before voting on this nomination.
Let's talk about President Biden coming into the final days of his administration. Still no word from the Biden administration about what they could possibly do with pardons for perceived political enemies of President-elect Trump, including members of the January 6th committee. President-elect Trump has said some of those members should go to jail, Liz Cheney, Benny Thompson among them. Thompson has spoken out publicly saying that he would accept a pardon if he's offered one, but there's a split among, I think, some in the Biden administration and also Democrats at large over whether pardons are necessary, whether it sends the wrong message. We're getting down to the final days here. It seems like these pardons are not going to happen.
Yeah, Benny Thompson, it's interesting. He is actually sort of in the minority as someone who's publicly said that they would take a pardon, preemptive pardon from President Biden on the way out the door. Folks like Adam Kinzinger, Adam Schiff, who served on that same January 6th committee, have said they don't want a pardon, that they worry that it implies some sort of guilt where they don't believe any exists, that they didn't do anything wrong. President Biden, it was interesting, in a couple of recent interviews he's done and Q&As he's done, has said he wanted to see sort of who Trump appointed to certain positions in his administration before deciding, that he wanted to hear about Trump's rhetoric in these final days. But ultimately, it's kind of, at this point, we know who these people are. We know who his appointees for FBI director, AG, Attorney General are. We've heard what Trump has to say. So it is, I think, notable that at this point, Biden hasn't committed, hasn't signaled even that he's leaning toward these preemptive pardons. Maybe a sign that I think he may ultimately opt not to issue these.
One thing President Biden has done in these final days is issue more student loan debt relief. The Biden administration forgiving student loans for about 150,000 additional borrowers. That brings the total people impacted by the Biden administration to 5 million. Some of these people were defrauded by their schools. Some of them are public service workers. What's going to happen under the Trump administration? Are they going to totally abandon any efforts to try to grant student loan relief?
Yes, this is going to be a really complicated question, I think, for the Trump administration, because you have all these questions around, when do they start repayments? Who has to start repayments? Is it all at once? The Education Department plays a big role in this. Trump, of course, has talked about wanting to shutter the Education Department. which would require an act of Congress, but nevertheless, he's talked about doing that. There's no indication that Trump plans to sort of continue this loan forgiveness program. So I think it is sort of a matter of the incoming administration figuring out when do they have people restart payments, and how exactly does that work? Does it happen all at once? Does it happen in waves, et cetera, et cetera?
I wonder how that will affect his standing with young people who he likes to brag that his numbers improved with compared to previous election cycles for Republicans. With these wildfires continuing to burn in LA County, the politics of aid for California are coming into focus. House Speaker Johnson said that there has been some discussion about tying aid to an increase in the debt ceiling. Maybe that could bring in some Democrats, and I think Republicans in places like California would be supportive of that. But I wonder if he risks losing House conservatives that he needs for his speakership by approving a debt cap increase, relief to California, without the corresponding spending cuts that they've been pushing so hardly for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the big question around all this is where do House conservatives, the House Freedom Caucus, sort of the right wing of the Republican conference in the House, where do those folks stand on all this? Because when it comes to raising the debt ceiling, when it comes to approving more spending, when it comes to getting Trump's agenda writ large done, we hear a lot from folks like Chip Roy from Texas, like other lawmakers, about the need to have offsets, to have spending cuts to offset any new spending. When it comes to raising the debt ceiling, those are lawmakers who aren't just going to willy-nilly vote to raise the debt ceiling and indefinitely continue to spend more money. So, it's sort of going to be a fraught discussion. I think we're already seeing that even with this disaster aid questions, with lawmakers sort of pondering how to get something that would seem so vital for California, pondering what the best way to get that across the finish line is.
Steve Bannon is continuing his war against the tech bros. He's the former Trump advisor and influential voice within the MAGA movement. He's now taking aim at Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg was at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend meeting with Trump. Bannon says Zuckerberg can't be trusted. He's also recently gone after Elon Musk, saying that he would have him removed from the MAGA movement before the inauguration. How seriously should these threats by Bannon be taken, especially as it pertains to these tech titans?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see this sort of battle play out of sort of one of the original backers of Trump versus sort of the new converts, essentially. Bannon, of course, was on Trump's 2016 campaign. He served in his White House his first year. Musk didn't even endorse Trump until after that assassination attempt in July. Zuckerberg, of course, more of a recent shift to align with Trump as far as Meta goes. As far as how seriously it should be taken, I think, yes, Steve Bannon is pretty influential in certain circles, the conservative movement, the MAGA movement, but Elon Musk is sort of the one with this advisory commission, Doge, with a government role, with Trump's ear, who seems to be spending a lot of time around Trump. Zuckerberg, you mentioned, has been at Mar-a-Lago a couple times in recent weeks. So, it doesn't seem like those guys are going anywhere. It seems like they have Trump's ear and like they're sort of in his good graces here. We'll see if Steve Bannon's banging the drum is enough to change that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Brett Samuels, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
This morning at 1 a.m., the Justice Department released Special Counsel Jack Smith's report on President-elect Trump's 2020 election interference case. Inside the 137-page report, Smith details evidence he believes shows the former president used his power to knowingly spread lies and misinformation in an effort to claim victory in an election he knew he lost. The president-elect took to Truth Social shortly after the report's release, going after Jack Smith, President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Trump also used the social media post to claim his total innocence and tout his election victory. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld with more details on what's inside the report. Now, Jack Smith wrote in his final report that if he were permitted to proceed with this case, he likely would have secured a conviction. In the report, how does he lay that out?
Yeah, this was a full-throated defense by special counsel Jack Smith of his prosecutions. Not necessarily a smoking gun in terms of dramatic new evidence that wasn't out there previously. This report at length merely walked through the case's history, talked about the allegations brought in the indictment and all of the court developments since then. But what was so striking about this report was it's the most extensive comments that we have seen to date from the special counsel himself. Yes, his office has spoken out in court filings over the course of these cases. He also gave that on-camera statement when these charges were first brought. That's the footage that you're seeing on the screen right now. But this was really the most extensive defense we have now seen from the special counsel, saying that these decisions to charge the former president were his decisions and up to him alone, and believing that they were the right ones and that these cases were in the public interest to be brought. So Jack Smith certainly here trying to get the final word in on these now fizzled out prosecutions.
Was there anything inside the report that wasn't already made public in prior court filings?
There were a few tidbits of new information. Like I said, no smoking gun, but a few new things. Just to take one to highlight, there was some new discussion about the co-conspirators in Trump's election interference case that was brought in the nation's capital. That indictment mentions 6 individuals who have not been formally charged with any crime, but they are alleged to have been part of these conspiracies central to the Trump case. And in this new special counsel report, Jack Smith has said that his office was in the process. They had made preliminary decisions, finding that for at least some of the co-conspirators, there was admissible evidence enough to potentially justify actually bringing charges and to try to charge some of these co-conspirators with crimes. But then he went on to say that his office never had an opportunity to make a final determination. So he left the discussion there, but certainly if he said, indicated that if Trump had not won the election, that there really would have been a very open discussion about whether to bring charges against these individuals. Court documents don't name these people by name, but we do know from descriptions that they appear to include individuals like Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, and some of these lawyers who were in Trump's orbit after the 2020 election.
So what happens now? Jack Smith has resigned. Merrick Garland will be replaced. What will happen with this report now?
At this point, this first volume of the report is now in the public eyes. Obviously, Trump has won the election. These cases have been dismissed as a result, so these cases aren't going to trial. There is going to be no jury verdict or potential conviction. So all that is left of these cases at this point is really this report and the evidence that Jack Smith has brought to light in public. Obviously, voters saw that evidence and then still catapulted the former president back to the White House, believing he was deserving of another White House term, but this is really now the final word and the final product from Jack Smith. Now, I should note there is one other volume of this report that we have not yet seen, and that is the volume of the report dealing with the classified documents case down in Florida. The Attorney General has indicated he does not plan to publicly release that volume because Trump still has co-defendants down in Florida whose cases are still proceeding, but there is still an open question as to whether Congress will be able to review that behind closed doors.
In other legal news, Special Counsel David Weiss, who investigated Hunter Biden, pushed back against President Biden and the decision to pardon his son. Weiss wrote at the end of his 280-page final report that his decision was based on the facts and the law and nothing else. Are those comments by the Special Counsel unusual to add in there at the end?
Well, I think in this case, there's very little that's usual about it. This was, of course, the first ever criminal prosecution of a sitting president's child, and then it culminated in the first ever presidential pardon from a president pardoning his own son. So certainly we were been in uncharted waters in this case, in unprecedented circumstances. And now, just like how in Jack Smith in his report, he was trying to push back on Trump and the defendant and trying to get the final word in, you saw the same thing in this report from Special Counsel David Weiss, condemning this pardon from President Biden, not merely for just, forgiving, the crimes that his son was found to have committed, but also the fact that Biden's pardon message indicated that he believed that these cases were only brought for political reasons. In a quote from Special Counsel David Weiss, he said that, quote, that statement is gratuitous and wrong. So certainly as David Weiss's investigations wrap up, he too trying to get the final word in.
Also going on this week, the Supreme Court has signaled it will release more opinions on Wednesday. This comes as the court is considering whether to step in and save TikTok before a potential ban goes into effect on Sunday. What can we expect from the opinion announcement tomorrow?
The court does not announce in advance which particular cases it's going to hand down a decision in. So these opinions tomorrow could be any of the few dozen cases that have now been argued since the term opened up back in October. But of course, there are all eyes right now on this TikTok case, this case that went to oral arguments at the end of last week. The court, at least coming out of those, seemed that they were likely to uphold this ban that would require TikTok by, as of Sunday, to either divest from its Chinese-based parent company or face a nationwide ban in the United States. Because they have been hearing that case on such an expedited schedule, that would suggest that they're perhaps going to race to issuing a full opinion and could get it out this week. So when we get to that opinion announcement Wednesday morning, that will certainly be top of mind, but we don't know for sure that that opinion is coming out tomorrow. It's also possible that they'll release more opinions later in the week.
All right, that's all I got for you, Zach. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
I believe we will get a ceasefire. And whether we get there in the remaining days of our administration or after January 20th, I believe the deal will follow closely the terms of the agreement that President Biden put forward last May and our administration rallied the world behind.
President Biden could be poised for one final victory before leaving office. The Israeli government and Hamas have said they are in the final stages of a ceasefire deal, and Hamas has accepted a draft agreement. The agreement also included the release of dozens of hostages. According to reports, the ceasefire would be implemented in 3 separate phases. In the first phase, Hamas would release 33 hostages that include women, children, men over the age of 50, and those who are wounded. According to an Israeli official, Israel, in exchange, would release many hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. The second and third phases are still in negotiation. While hopes of a finalized ceasefire are at their highest, mediators are still concerned that a deal could fall through. Donald Trump has already relayed his plans for his second term. In today's Political Minute, News Nation chief Washington correspondent and host of The Hill, Blake Berman, dives into what the incoming president says his focus will be after he takes the oath of office.
100 executive orders. I'm Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation. President-elect Donald Trump told Republican senators last week that he wants to enact 100 executive orders right after his term begins. According to our partners at thehill.com, one senator said that Trump wants most of the orders to focus on the country's southern border. They could include reinstatement of Title 42, the COVID-era policy that allowed migrants to be turned away for public health reasons. But the incoming president will need Congress's help to achieve the bulk of his policy agenda. Republicans still haven't decided on exactly how to handle his high-priority items like border security and tax reform, The Hill reports. Trump and the House Speaker Mike Johnson have touted passing the bulk of the Trump agenda in one single bill. Some senators, including the Majority Leader John Thune, prefer to break it up. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
For more news and analysis from Blake and our colleagues at News Nation, go to joinnn.com. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.